Thank you all for coming back. Some of you probably sound asleep still because I put you to sleep yesterday night late and you're falling asleep in here. But welcome to all of you who woke up and got here on time. I wanted to start by saying that it's very important that you understand that everything is debatable. After yesterday's lecture, I had a very nice young person come up to me and talk to me about how her belief in critical argumentation was very important to her. That's someone who learned the lesson that everything is debatable. And you should challenge orthodoxy. That's how change gets done. That's how the world gets better. Unless you think that I don't believe in identity arguments or critical arguments, you're wrong. Let me talk to you a little bit about my son's career in high school debate. He started on the oceans topic. By the end of the year, our affirmative was about, his affirmative, was about making sonar sounds in the ocean by the Navy. And it wasn't that we cared about nuclear war. It's that we cared about whales beaching themselves up on the shore because the sound of the sonar was painful to the ears of the whale. Not a big stick affirmative, but it talks about the human influence on the animal kingdom and the suffering that it brings. Next year's topic was about troop withdrawal. And his affirmative was about eliminating a presidential directive called PDD 25. And PDD 25 was initiated by the Clinton administration. And PDD 25 said the United States should never intervene in any conflict outside the United States unless the United States' national interest was affected. And that's what prevented the United States from going into Rwanda when a genocide was happening in Rwanda. And genocide was occurring. And that level of structural violence of genocide was the impact of his affirmative. It works. It's not that it doesn't work, it does. It's not that it doesn't matter, it does. Same thing is true with other forms of structural violence. Not only are they impacts that can work, and especially on the education topic are they important, because it's the educational system that is one part of the redlining that creates racial injustice in society. It is the redlining and the development of sending men into science and women into homemaking and the legacy of that gendered problem with education that has created and deprived human beings of some of the most important and significant valuable contributions that can be made. The kid that I talked about, Michael Wimsatt, who was the debater in the wheelchair, one of his affirmatives was a very interesting one on the space topic one year. And the space topic was about the exploration of space and increasing exploration and increasing human knowledge of exploration of space. And at the TLC one year, he qualified as a junior. The affirmative that I helped him write and worked with him on was about eliminating the requirement for the astronaut training program by the United States for any physical requirements to get into space. Because in that debate year, the only person in high school debate who could never have gotten into the United States astronaut training program was Michael. He was in a wheelchair. He couldn't move his legs or his arms. And so the expansion of human knowledge into space would be facilitated by eliminating restrictions on physical requirements for getting in the astronaut training program. Now, he never ran the affirmative because he looked at me before the 5th round at the TOC when Aaron Hardy, a Michigan State debater, was judging, and they were debating Margaret and her partner Donnie Grassi in the 5th round in a down 2 round. I said, okay, now's the time to run this out. And Michael looked at me and he said, Mr. Smelko, by the time I'm done, I don't want to be known as the debater in the wheelchair. I want to be known as a debater. And the reality of life is that people can and should argue what they want to argue. They can and should argue what they believe in wholeheartedly. And if they want to run critical arguments, and if they want to present arguments about structural violence, it's not out of the ordinary, it's not uncommon. It's won 2 out of the last 4 national debate tournaments. It is a winning strategy, but it's also a very personal strategy. And so, to anyone who felt like I mocked their ideas or their beliefs or the way they want to debate, just think about what I also mocked yesterday. I mocked topicality. What's the best defense to a case that says nothing about the topic, but does want to talk about identity, that does want to talk about race, that does want to talk about gender, that does want to talk about orientation? Well, the best defense from the negative side is a framework debate that devolves down to topicality. We're given a topic. It's unfair to talk about something else that we can't explain, we can't discuss. I don't vote on topicality regardless of what the app is, except for those 2 occasions when the app blew it at the NBT. But the idea and the concept is not to tell anyone that you should or should not do any kind of argument. One of the smartest people that I've ever met in debate is, and hopefully someday you might get a chance to meet him, is a gentleman named David Glass. David Glass is the leading medical research scientist for a company called Novartis. He splits his time between Basel, Switzerland, and Cambridge, Massachusetts. He helps with Harvard's debate program. He's a tremendous debater. I taught him when he was 14 years old at an institute at Harvard University in 1975. I said, you know, I don't like all of this stuff about protest debate and personal identity debate. And David called me back and he says, but Bill, that's the way the world is working. That is how change is occurring in society. There's nothing wrong with doing that, and he's right. There is nothing wrong with a different approach to debate. Because what I told you yesterday that should resonate with you is not all the funny stuff and all the enjoyable stuff. What I told you yesterday, at least I thought it was funny. What I told you yesterday that matters is that everything is debatable. So that's the lesson that I want you to get. And I would like to very, very, very seriously commend the young lady that came up to me to challenge my orthodoxy and to challenge what I said. Because that's what you as debaters should do, and that's kind of what we're going to learn in the second half of this morning's story. But the first half is about winning debates. Note the word in red. This round matters. And it is this round that matters. You win this round by doing these things. You focus. You focus your attention. I'm going to repeat it. 100% of your attention, 100% of the time. Has to be on listening to what is said. You have to be organized, both before the debate starts and understanding what must happen in a debate round for you to win. From the perspective of being a winning debater in a debate round, you need to know what must happen for you to win. But by the same token, you also must know what cannot happen. You cannot drop important arguments. That means you can't be distracted. That means you can't be tired. That means you have to be focused. That's what can't happen. Dropping arguments. Not understanding what the other team has said. Not listening. If you listen, if you understand, and if you respond, you can win. And finally, you must execute. You must prepare to win debates. You must perform. Performing is different than debating, the way it goes now. See, debating now is a lot about reading stuff. Reading stuff is in communication. Reading stuff is just getting words out. Communication is eye contact. Communication is participation. Communication is discussion. Communication is relating to the only person in the round that really matters, the judge. See, it is the judge that matters. Anybody see the movie, I guess Debaters is what it was, about Wiley College debate? And there's this whole story that is told. And it's a story that is told to every debater that comes through Wiley College, an historically black university that went to beat Harvard in the movie, but actually it was against USC in real life that they beat USC, which is okay, I like beating USC. The story is told, and the lead in the movie says, who matters? The judge. Who's the only person that matters? The judge. Where must your focus of attention be? Must be on the judge. During cross-examination, you don't care what the other person is doing. You care what the judge is responding to from what you're doing. Focusing on the judge is what makes you win this round. The what is what you do. Remember the great teachers? Teach you what? Focus on the judge. They teach you why. Because you want to win. I teach you also how. And the how of focusing on the judge requires you to understand the spatial relationship in a debate round. You don't sit with your backs to the judge. You sit facing the judge. You want to watch the judge. You want to see the judge's reaction. You want to get to the room early so that you can set up to be able to visualize and see the judge while the debate's going on. Where you orient yourself and set your materials up is really, really crucial and important. If only the judge matters, find out what the judge is feeling. Find out what the judge is responding to. Find out how the judge is reacting. Where you sit matters. Where you stand or sit in cross-X. If you're standing here talking to the other person, you're talking to the wrong person. We'll talk a lot more about cross-examination later. But the focus, even during cross-X, whether you are asking questions or answering questions, has to be out there, not over there. Where you speak and seeing the judge. Here's the biggest problem that happens in debate. When I'm judging, and somebody gets to where they're going, and they're like this. Oh my God, you're not debating to your computer. You shouldn't be. You're not debating to your laptop. You shouldn't be. You're debating to the audience, to the judge, to the critic, particularly in elimination room. I told you that my idea of coaching in prelims is just to tell my teams, go in and make arguments. That's it. I don't write stuff for them. I don't tell them what to run. Make arguments. Have fun. The coaching advice in elim rounds is slightly different. I tell them that they have to win the arguments. But more importantly, they have to win the room. See, debate in elim rounds is about performing. It's about getting a sense of who is winning the round by gauging what the audience reaction is to what is happening in the round. And if you're offensive, you don't win. If you're defensive, you don't win. What you have to be is communication oriented to the audience. In the elim round, you not only need to win the debate, you need to win the room. And so the focus out there and seeing the judge matters. Finally, sneak peek or three at the judge. Every time you're reading, every once in a while, look up at the judge, see what they're doing. Most of the judges will be paying attention. Some won't be. Do something to get their attention. Maybe stop till they start look up at you and go, what's happening? Get them to pay attention by sneaking a peek at the judge and seeing what the judge is saying. To win debate rounds, to win this debate round, you have to listen and you have to learn. By listening and learning, you understand what wins and loses in debate rounds, except for some judges that are way too focused on cards, way too focused on reading evidence, way too focused on making up their own minds about what evidence is good and what evidence is bad. See, I think that it's up to the debaters to compare the evidence. I think it's up to the debaters to say, my evidence is better because, and that's what gets said in the round. So the more you pay attention to what you say and what the other side says in comparing the evidence, the better I think you will be not only in that round, but also in advocating for the positions that you want to espouse outside the round. Debates are judged by what is said in the round. I should have written that to say debates should be judged by what is said in the round. Unfortunately, all too often debates are not judged based upon what is said, but rather based upon the evidence and the cards that the judges read after the round. The more effective you are at communicating why your evidence is better, the more rounds you will win, because the judges might remember why you indict somebody else's evidence. Hearing what happens really does frame winning. And to hear, you have to process and apply the thoughts and the arguments that you want to make. Too often, especially in the clash of civilization debate, meaning somebody wants to do identity and other people want to do policy, somebody wants to do critical, other people want to do policy, somebody wants to do identity, other people want to do critical. All of those debates clash civilizations. And the problem with those debates is that very few people understand that what really matters in the round is not the direction that one side heads, and it's not the direction that the other side heads. It's that little part in the middle that's the flip over that makes the difference between winning and losing. For a judge wholly bent on critical argumentation, for a judge wholly bent on structural violence, for a judge wholly bent on identity politics or identification debates, if that is all they are focused on, that's what's going to win. However, for a judge wholly bent on politics disad, wholly bent on policy disads, wholly bent on policy debating, if that's all the judge is going to focus on, that's who's going to win. But the best judges listen to both arguments and understand that it's those people in the middle that are comparing their arguments and your arguments and explaining which is better that wind up winning. Many people will reject critical arguments out of hand. Some people will reject policy arguments out of hand. Your job as debaters is to understand that you need to make in that round your identity assertions important. And you make them important, you make your policy assertions important, not in relation to the abstract, but rather in comparison to the other person's argument. You will be in lots of debates where one team wants to talk about something and another team wants to talk about something else. The debaters that win most of those debates are the ones that compare and explain why their arguments are more important than the other side. And doing that requires an important understanding that you have to listen. You have to understand and use the best of your ability the arguments that are there. Now, how do you argue? We talked a little bit about it yesterday, yes-no debating. They say yes, you say no. Direct clash. It's called direct clash. They don't have evidence, so they have bad evidence. It's called indicting their proof. Every argument, a claim, a warrant, evidence, proof. You can attack that. Argument analysis, earlier versus later. We happen first, they happen second. Our first is more important because it's more timely. And this is really where the advantage of structural violence arguments come in. See, structural violence is happening now. It happens every day. Violence against women happens now. Violence against transgenders and gays happen now. Nuclear war happens tomorrow. Which is more important? A nuclear war that might happen someday, or structural violence that is happening today? Making that comparison and making those arguments and understanding that those arguments are meaningful becomes important to making you a better debater. because you're not going to be able to control everything that is said. You're not going to be able to control the direction of the round. The other team is going to be part of that equation. And how you frame the comparison is what matters and makes you a debater. The final thing is this one. This is the best form of argument. Yes, I agree, but that's why I win. See now, let me, so that you get this, write this all down. I don't want your goal to be to win the TOC. Honest to God, I don't. I want your goal to be Maggie Berthiaume. That's who I want you to be. Maggie, stand up. The greatest honor my son ever got was to be named a finalist of the Julia Burke Award. Maggie is brilliant. Maggie is bright. Maggie was a tremendous high school and college debater. Maggie is a beautiful college, high school coach. But the best thing about Maggie that I want you to emulate is that she was the first winner of the Julia Burke Award. Strive not to win the TOC, strive to win the Julia Burke Award. Read about it. It's about being a human being in a contest of debate. You can become the winner of the TOC from McDonough High School last year. That's great. But if you become Maggie and win the Julia Burke Award, that's even better. Debate is it's a very intense experience. It is very hard and difficult. But being a human being through the process matters. So with that out of the way, let me tell you how you should debate. See, the best argument is to look at the other team and say, you're right, but that's why I win. The best debaters are ruthless. They're not mean, but they're ruthless. What you want to do is you want to take the other team's argument. Take it like it's their arm. As a debater, you want to rip their arm off. You want to beat them over the head with their own arm. And then you want to feed them their fingers one at a time. And that's the best argument. They said it, but I win because they said it. Now, will that win you the Julia Burke Award? Maybe not. Might it win you some debate rounds? Sure it will. The idea is to use what the other team says to your benefit. Because yes-no debating is very surface. Evidence debating is very surface. Thinking and critical thinking debating about the use of arguments in your favor is very important. And that's why I win debating. The turn method of debating becomes very important. Here's how you win the yes-no debate. Two teams, equally clear. Two teams, equally well evidenced. One team says, education in high school is good. The other team says, education in high school is bad. Who wins that debate? The team that wins that debate is the team that is more explanatory and tells you our what is better than their what. Education good is better than education bad. The team that wins that debate has a better when. Education is good now. Education might have been bad then, but our when is better than their when. And the team that wins that yes-no debate gives you a better why. What is the rational reason why our argument of equal evidence, of equal clarity, is better and should be voted for? Understanding the why of debating and understanding the why of arguments, or the rationale or warrants, becomes how you win the yes-no debate. Here's how you lock it in. To win a debate that is purely, they say X, we say Y, they say white, we say black, they say yes, we say no, here's how you do it. You have to be more clear on what it is that you're saying. If a judge understands what you're saying better than he understands or she understands what they are saying, you're more likely to win. The more understandable debater wins. Second, you have to be persuasive about the why. Why is our argument better than their argument? That involves persuasion. It doesn't involve reading as fast as you possibly can into your computer screen. But finally, you have to be smarter on the puzzle. See, debate isn't about winning arguments. Debate is about winning debates. How your argument, how that analysis, how this yes versus their no wins you the debate is what matters. Being smarter on putting the what into where the end of the debate should be means that you are going to win more debates than you will lose. Now, will you win everything? No, you won't win everything. Nobody wins every debate. I actually thought I did, but some judges disagreed with me on occasion, very few occasions. But the idea is to understand that if you have two teams of equal strength making equally evidenced and equally well-evidenced arguments, the team that wins the debate is more clear about what their argument is more persuasive about why their argument is good, and is certainly smarter on where their argument fits into the puzzle. If you just want to argue about evidence. And as I say, some judges, unfortunately, will be the kind of judges that just read the cards after the round and give you a reason for decision that says, oh, I just thought that card was pretty good, so that's why I voted out. That's not a judge. That's a person that didn't listen to the debate. That's a person that just says, I've read the card, that's who it is. It isn't about what the cards say, it's about how the debater, it should be, about how the debaters affected the cards during the course of the round. These are the general kinds of evidence that happen in debate rounds and that happen in my profession. This is what you put on the witness stand. You can put historical evidence on it. Brown versus Board of Education happened in 1950s. Earl Warren was the Chief Justice of the United States when Brown versus Board of Education was decided. The decision was 9-0. The decision was 7-2. Historical examples of what evidence are, or would be, is evidence. This did happen. Those are factual issues that can be decided based upon historical truth. But that's evidence. X occurred. Historical evidence. Empirical evidence. Numbers. Global warming is happening. No, it isn't. Yes, it is. No, it isn't. Here's the statistics over the last 100 years. Here's the size of the shelf in Antarctica that fell off Antarctica. Empirical evidence is numbers. Here are the number of people that Presidential Directive 25 allowed to die in Rwanda because of genocide. Here are the number of people that are being harmed by structural violence in our colleges and universities, in secondary schools. Here are the number of people that are being forced to suicide by reason of bullying. Empirical evidence in terms of numbers. Scientific evidence. Scientific evidence is based upon analysis and review of events. And you take a hypothesis, and you evaluate and study, and you reach a conclusion based upon events. And there are two kinds of evidence. Evidence that is associative, and evidence that is causal. Causal evidence is better, or causal conclusions are better than evidence of association. And the reason it's better is because if you can eliminate the cause of a problem, it is far more easy to prove solvency, meaning eliminating the solution or creating a solution. The final piece of evidence is opinion evidence. That's the weakest form of evidence. It's the weakest form of evidence because an opinion is only as good as the qualifications of the author. Something quoted from UPI, something quoted from AOL News, doesn't necessarily mean it's bad evidence, because it might be historical evidence, which is merely reporting a fact. Something on AOL News, something on Yahoo.com might be terrible evidence because it is some unknown source creating an opinion. The opinion might be, violence against women doesn't happen. That's an opinion. That opinion, if it comes from an unqualified source, isn't worth anything. So the indictment that you as a debater would have to opinion evidence looks first to the source. Opinion evidence is only as good as the qualifications of the source. And sometimes debating the qualifications of a source matters. Debating the qualifications of AOL.com when reporting the vote in the Senate that happened yesterday, waste of time because the vote is historical. And AOL is not giving you an opinion about what the vote is. AOL is reporting what the vote is. So understanding the types of evidence will help you deal with debating the evidence. And that's what we're talking about now. How do you debate the evidence? This is what I see in terms of who wins the game of my evidence is better than your evidence. Why? Why is my evidence better? Well, sometimes your evidence is better because it is more recent. Sometimes your evidence is better because it comes from a more qualified source. Sometimes your evidence is better because it is more well-reasoned. And the warrants of your evidence are better than the warrants of their evidence. How do you debate the evidence? Well, the first step, very simple. You have to read it. You have to hear it. You have to understand what the evidence is. You should know the evidence going into the debate round, particularly your 1AC and 2AC and 1AR evidence. You should know that because for providing yourself with the idea about why your evidence is good makes it easier to explain it to a judge in the heat of the debate round. And finally, you win the evidence battle by comparing. Our evidence is predictive, theirs is not. Our evidence is based upon a larger study sample group, their evidence is not. Our evidence is based upon a review and a survey of Republican congressmen who say they will not vote for the bill. Their evidence is just opinion about who might or might not vote for it. Comparing the evidence means that you compare why your evidence is better than their evidence. Now, what do? The first thing to do to protect yourself in the evidence game is to find the holes in the other side's evidence and know what the holes are in your evidence to be able to explain it away. You find the holes in the other side's evidence by looking at what they didn't highlight, not by what they did. You find the holes in the other side's evidence by looking at what is in 2-point font as opposed to what is in 16-point font. Because the holes of the evidence are what teams try to divert your attention away from. Look for words like but, and, however. If you find those words not read during the course of the debate, read them back to the other team in cross-examination. Finding the holes in the evidence requires you to read the evidence. But you can't just find the holes in the evidence and leave it there. You got to take the next step. You must make the evidence important while you're speaking. When you're comparing the evidence, you talk about it. When you're comparing the evidence, you're not reading into your computer, you're persuading the judge about why your evidence is good compared to their evidence, which is bad. And finally, you use the evidence to close it down. You look to the end game. Here is why this comparison of evidence debate matters to the eventual outcome. Impact debating is not merely about the impacts of structural violence or of nuclear war or of whales dying on a beach. Impact evidence is about what impacts the eventual outcome of the debate round. And that's how you close it down. Too often, people get consumed with dates, when something matters. There are occasions when time matters. There are occasions in the past when time matters in terms of the ultimate outcome of the debate round. There are occasions when now time matters. See, structural violence is happening now. Nuclear war might happen next year. Structural violence is happening now. Improving the educational system might happen next year. Now versus tomorrow becomes very important. And what happens next really matters. In determining and deciding what happens in the outcome of a debate round, it becomes extremely important to compare when something might happen. And let's talk about each of those things now. In the past matters. The past matters only to determine whether or not a win or a loss happens in the debate round, and that is figuring out when did something happen. What happens first, and knowing what happens first, might matter if you are arguing about cause and effect. If the effect happened before the cause, then guess what? The cause didn't create the effect. Understanding the sequencing of events matters by looking at the past in terms of what did happen. If something happened before an effect, that might have been the cause. It might have been associated with the cause. It might be, if you eliminate the cause with your plan, you eliminate the effect, which is the harm. Knowing which happened first and which happened next matters. Sequencing is something you should think about. Second, when was something written sometimes matters. Our card is more recent. Well, so what? If the card doesn't clash with the other card, if the card doesn't say something new, if something intervening didn't happen between the time of their card and your card, it may not matter. But oftentimes, judges will like the fact that your evidence is written more recently than theirs. There's an assumption that may not be true, but an assumption on some judges' parts that more recent evidence is better. It's not always the case, but it sometimes is. And finally, the logic of time. Debate isn't about just saying, our card is more recent. Debate isn't just about saying, well, this happened first and this happened next. Debate is about the logic of why it matters that this happened first and that happened next. Debate is about articulating the logic of why it matters that your card was written yesterday and their card was written 2 days ago. Debate is about explaining the logic of time and applying the logic of time to the eventual outcome and where you want things to go. That's the past. The present. I think time in the present and now, and evidence about the now, happens most frequently in connection with the politics disadvantage or about inherency. What Congress has done or is likely to do or has done or what the administration has done, what regulations are there. In the politics disadvantage, night before, morning of, updates matter. You may not want to debate the politics disadvantage. That's okay. You may never want to talk about what Congress does. That's okay. You may never want to discuss what the president does. That's okay. But somebody else might. So it never hurts to update. It never hurts to have a card on healthcare bill, whether it will pass or not. It never hurts to have a card from this morning about whether or not the passage of X, Y, or Z proposal is likely. Updating research in the present at the tournament matters. Even if you don't run the politics disadvantage, when you're affirmative, somebody might run it against you. And it never hurts to have an evidenced answer, particularly if Mr. Batterman is your judge. You got to have cards. You got to have ev. Do it even if you're not going to run the politics disadvantage. This is when the present matters. Evidence from today in the politics disadvantage is more important than evidence from yesterday. So constantly be updating, if you're a politics debater, your politics cards. You can't use the updates from the sources that provide politics updates, because that's last week's evidence. You need today's evidence to make a difference. Future. How does the future impact debate rounds? Well, the future impacts debate rounds in two contexts. It affects everything else, but in two contexts it's the most important. The future affects disadvantages, and the future affects solvency. See, because where most debaters don't do anything that's effective, where Tyler and Margaret were great, is they would think about what happens first. They would think about why the disadvantage is more important, not because it creates Russian nuclear war, but because the Russian nuclear war it's going to create will happen sooner if the plan is passed. Time matters in terms of disadvantages because what is first matters. If the impact of the disad is going to happen before the case impacts happen, that matters. If the impact of structural violence is happening now, and the disad is going to happen a year from now, it may mean that you vote affirmative because the harms that need to be prevented are of such significance and importance to humanity generally that you got to stop it. And you stop it even at the risk of a nuclear war a year from now. But that's all about arguments. That's utilitarianism and consequentialism and all those isms that I don't like to talk about because it gets debate going in different ways. But in terms of what is first, it matters. And what's next is the link debate and the disadvantage. How likely is it and how soon will the links or the internal links happen? You need to be prepared to debate that and argue that. In terms of the impact debate on disads, it becomes very important for you to understand that when is typically the most important element of debate impact. I told you yesterday, and I'll tell you again now, impact debate is not just about how big something is. You debate impacts in debate about how big something is, but also about how soon something happens. You also debate impacts based on probability. How likely is it that this big impact will happen this soon? Impact debating. How big? When? How probable? Those are the three impacts that the greatest debaters discuss. Those are the three impacts that the greatest debaters deal with. The greatest debaters don't say, and in a nuclear war we'll have extinction. And in a nuclear war 100 million people will die. That's not an impact. Great debaters talk about those large impacts and how likely they are. Great debaters talk about those large impacts and when they will occur in relationship to what the other side has talked about. The second element about when timing in the future matters is in connection with the solvency debate. Solvency is very important. And typically affirmatives assume the existence of solvency. This year, solvency is going to be real important to discuss and debate and analyze. And the reason it's going to be important is because improving education doesn't mean that the impacts happen tomorrow. Unless you're talking about claims of structural violence, through which the impacts can be changed by a plan that gets implemented today. See, when you're talking about elementary and secondary education, the effects of improving education don't necessarily happen today in the bigger picture of the world. Those effects happen when the elementary and secondary school students become human beings who vote, become human beings who change lives, become human beings who go to airports to save people from being deported. Those changes that get made aren't going to happen today. They're going to happen sometime in the future. So your job this year in particular is to understand exactly what's going on in terms of when something happens. So the solvency debate and the disad debate are very critical to timing issues and understanding when something will happen. In the past, understanding the nexus of what happened first and what happened next matters. In the present, typically the politics disadvantage is what really matters. But in the future, you need to understand timing in relationship to disadvantage and when the disad impacts are going to happen compared to when the case harms are going to happen, and when the plan achieves its claim solvency. Debate. Debate in the modern world includes cross-examination. Cross-examination involves two things. It involves asking questions, and it involves answering questions. Cross-examination is important because it's cross-examination that typically governs who gets a 29.9 and who gets a 29.6. See, I'm known as a point fairy. I believe in giving really high points. Maybe that's why Tyler and Mark are like it. The idea is you have to understand that cross-examination is the time in which you can exhibit yourself in comparison to the other team and exhibit and demonstrate your own sense of professionalism. Cross-examination matters in terms of how the judge evaluates you as a person. But cross-examination is just about asking and answering questions. Good teaching, bad teaching. Bad teaching starts or finishes with a negative. So I'm going to start with a negative. Don't be the ventriloquist. You got a partner. Let your partner talk. You got a partner. Let your partner ask questions. It isn't about you. It's a two-person team activity. Go be a Lincoln Douglas debater if you want to ask all the questions. Go be a public forum debater if you don't want to ask or answer any questions. It's a two-person activity. Don't be the ventriloquist. Be tougher than that. Be better than that. Don't be the know-it-all. If you don't know the answer to a question, don't be afraid to say, I don't know. What I tell my witnesses before I put them on the witness stand in any kind of a case, if you don't know the answer to the question, tell the judge or the jury you don't know. Because you're likely to guess, and more than 50% of this time you guess wrong. And then we're bound by your answer because you're giving it under oath. If you don't know the answer to a question, don't guess. By the same token, don't you be the dummy. Not dummy in terms of mental capacity. Dummy in terms of somebody else speaking for you. Your job is to answer the question. Your job is to ask the questions. It isn't your partner's job to feed you the questions. You need to be engaged to do the asking. You need to be engaged to do the answering. You also cannot know nothing. You have to know something. You certainly should know your 1A.